The rescue convoy moved silently through the cold, dark void of space. It was a small fleet of ships, each one carrying supplies and medical equipment. Their mission was simple: reach the planet Epsilon 7 and evacuate the colonists who had been stranded there for weeks. The colonists were running out of food and water, and Earth's government had acted quickly to send help. Captain Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes scanning the monitors in front of him. Everything seemed calm, almost too calm. Lieutenant Laura Hayes sat at her station nearby, monitoring communications. She was young but skilled, with sharp instincts that had earned her a place on this important mission. Her fingers danced over the controls as she checked for any signs of trouble. So far, there was nothing unusual. The convoy was still hours away from Epsilon 7, and the journey had been smooth. But something about the silence made her uneasy. Space was vast and unpredictable, and danger could come from anywhere. Suddenly, a blip appeared on the radar. It was faint at first, almost like static, but it grew stronger with each passing second. Laura frowned and leaned closer to her screen. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern, "we've got something here. Unknown contact, bearing 045 degrees. Daniel turned to look at her. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "Can you confirm?" he asked. Laura shook her head. "Negative. It's not responding to hails, and it's moving fast." Before they could react, the unknown object unleashed a barrage of missiles. Bright streaks of light shot across the darkness, slamming into the convoy with devastating force. Ships erupted in fiery explosions, their hulls torn apart by the impact. Alarms screamed throughout the fleet as chaos engulfed the crew. Panic spread like wildfire as people scrambled to respond to the attack. "Shields up," Daniel shouted, gripping the edge of his console. "Return fire." But it was too late. The attackers had caught them completely off guard. One by one, the ships in the convoy fell victim to the relentless assault. Laura watched in horror as the ship next to hers exploded in a brilliant flash, sending debris spiraling into the void. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to focus on her duties, but the sight of her friends dying around her was overwhelming. Amidst the chaos, Daniel managed to send out a distress signal. "This is Captain Carter of the rescue convoy," he said, his voice firm despite the terror unfolding around him. "We are under attack. Coordinates 325 by 187. Request immediate assistance." He didn't know if anyone would hear the message, but it was their only hope. The attackers showed no mercy. Wave after wave of missiles rained down on the convoy, leaving destruction in their wake. Laura fought back tears as she worked to stabilize their failing systems. The ship shuddered violently under another direct hit, throwing her from her seat. Pain shot through her side as she hit the floor, but she forced herself to get up. There was no time to stop, no time to grieve. As the battle raged on, the true scale of the tragedy became clear. Dozens of lives had already been lost, and more were in danger with every passing second. Laura's mind raced with questions. Who were these attackers? Why would someone target a rescue mission? The answers eluded her, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration of war. When the dust finally settled, only a handful of ships remained intact. The survivors were battered and broken, their spirits crushed by the horrors they had witnessed. Laura stared out the viewport at the wreckage floating silently in the void. Her hands trembled as she clenched the edge of her chair. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of anger began to grow. Whoever was responsible for this would pay. They had to. And so, the seeds of retaliation were planted. Back on Earth, news of the attack spread like wildfire. The images of burning ships and lifeless bodies floating in space were broadcast across every channel. People gathered around screens in homes, offices, and public squares, their faces filled with shock and anger. How could anyone attack a rescue mission? It was an act of pure cruelty, and the world demanded answers. General Matthew Reynolds stood in a dimly lit room at the United Nations headquarters. Around him, Military leaders and government officials sat in tense silence. The air was heavy with grief and frustration. On a large screen at the front of the room, Intelligence Officer Rachel Parker presented her findings. She clicked a button, and the image of a man appeared on the screen. His face was sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. "This is Victor Kane," Rachel said, her voice steady but firm. "He's the leader of the Orion Syndicate, a group that has been hostile to Earth's expansion into space for years. We believe they're responsible for the attack." Rachel explained how the Syndicate had been growing stronger, using illegal weapons and recruiting mercenaries to carry out their plans. They saw Earth's colonies as a threat to their power and had vowed to stop them by any means necessary. The ambush on the rescue convoy wasn't random. It was carefully planned. The Syndicate had known exactly where the convoy would be and when it would arrive. General Reynolds listened intently, his jaw clenched. He knew this wasn't just about one attack. This was a challenge to Earth's authority, a test of its strength. If they didn't respond, the Syndicate would only grow bolder. "Do we have proof?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. Rachel nodded. "We've traced the missiles used in the attack to a factory owned by the Syndicate. There's also evidence that they've been spying on our communications for months. They knew everything about the convoy before it even launched." The room fell silent as the weight of the situation sank in. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of aggression. Someone had to pay for what happened. The question was, how far were they willing to go? President William Hart entered the room, his expression grim. He had already seen the reports and knew what needed to be done. Standing at the front of the room, he addressed the group. "This was not just an attack on a convoy," he said, his voice firm. "It was an attack on humanity itself. The people aboard those ships were husbands, wives, sons, and daughters. They were trying to save lives, and now, because of the Syndicate's actions, those lives are gone." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Earth will not stand for this. We will find those responsible, and we will make them pay. I want a plan ready within 48 hours. This ends now." As the meeting broke up, Laura Hayes was called in to share her account of the attack. She sat in a small office, her hands clasped tightly together. Across from her, Major Ethan Cole listened intently as she recounted the horrors she had witnessed. Her voice trembled at times, but she forced herself to stay composed. She described the chaos, the explosions, and the sense of helplessness as they were ambushed without warning. Ethan studied her closely. He could see the pain in her eyes, but there was something else too: determination. "You handled yourself well out there," he said after she finished. "You kept your head when others might have panicked. That takes courage." Laura looked down at her hands. "I didn't do enough," she replied softly. "If I had acted faster, maybe some of them would still be alive." Ethan shook his head. "You can't blame yourself for what happened. But if you want to make a difference, there's something you can do. We're putting together a team to take the fight to the Syndicate. You'd be a valuable asset." Laura hesitated. Going back into space, facing the same enemy that had destroyed her convoy, it was a terrifying thought. But deep down, she knew she couldn't just sit idly by. Not after what she had seen. Slowly, she nodded. "I'm in," she said, her voice stronger now. Ethan gave her a small smile. "Good. We'll need people like you if we're going to win this war." As Laura left the office, she felt a mix of fear and resolve. The road ahead would be dangerous, but she was ready. The Syndicate had started this fight, and she intended to finish it. President William Hart stood at the podium, his face calm but his eyes sharp with determination. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing as they waited for him to speak. Behind him, a large screen displayed images of the destroyed convoy, burning ships and debris floating in the endless blackness of space. The sight sent a chill through everyone watching, both in the room and across the world. "This attack was not just on a convoy," President Hart began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. It was an attack on all of us, on our values, on our humanity. Those ships carried people who were trying to save lives. They were unarmed, unprepared for violence. And yet they were ambushed without mercy. The room grew silent as he paused, letting his words sink in. We cannot, and we will not, allow such cruelty to go unanswered. This is not just about revenge. It's about protecting our future. If we do nothing, others will see us as weak. They will think they can hurt us without consequences. That ends today. He went on to announce Operation Reckoning, a full-scale military campaign aimed at dismantling the Orion Syndicate. The name alone sent a clear message. Earth would strike back, and it would strike hard. Leading the operation would be Admiral Robert Ellis, a man known for his quick thinking and iron will. He had spent decades in the military, rising through the ranks because of his ability to adapt and overcome. Now he would lead Earth's forces into what could be the most important battle in its history. Admiral Ellis listened carefully as plans were laid out in a secure war room. Maps of the galaxy were spread across a table, dotted with markers showing the locations of known syndicate bases. Intelligence reports confirmed that Victor Kane, the leader of the syndicate, was hiding in a heavily fortified asteroid base, deep within a dense nebula. It was a dangerous place, almost impossible to navigate, but it was also their best chance to end this threat once and for all. Laura Hayes sat quietly in a corner of the room, still processing everything she had seen and heard. She felt out of place among the high-ranking officers and strategists, but Major Ethan Cole had insisted she join the briefing. "You've been on the front lines," he told her. "Your perspective matters." And so she stayed, listening as the plan came together. The mission would involve two main phases. First, stealth fighters would disable the asteroid base's defense systems, creating an opening for the larger fleet to move in. Then ground teams would land on the surface, infiltrate the base, and gather intelligence while searching for Kane. Laura was assigned to one of these teams, alongside tech specialist Mark Dawson and medic Sarah Bennett. Both were experienced and skilled, and Laura knew she would need to rely on them if they were going to succeed. As the meeting ended, Admiral Ellis addressed the group. "This won't be easy," he said, his voice firm. "But we have no choice. The Syndicate thinks they can push us around, that they can take whatever they want. We're going to show them they're wrong." Later that night, Laura found herself staring out a window at the stars. Her mind was racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. She thought about her friends who had died in the ambush, about the families waiting for news of their loved ones. She clenched her fists, feeling anger bubbling inside her. The Syndicate had started this fight, but Earth was going to finish it. Mark approached her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Can't sleep?" he asked, handing her one of the cups. Laura shook her head. "Too much on my mind." Mark nodded. "I get it. But remember, we're not doing this alone. We've got each other's backs." She smiled faintly. "Thanks, Mark. I needed to hear that." As they stood there, sipping their coffee and looking up at the stars, Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be tough, but she was ready. Together, they would bring justice to those who had attacked the convoy, and make sure no one dared to harm Earth again. The fleet gathered at Luna Base, a sprawling complex on the moon that served as Earth's primary staging ground for space missions. Engineers worked around the clock, their tools clinking and hissing as they upgraded ships with new weapons and shields. The air buzzed with activity. Soldiers ran drills, technicians tested equipment, and pilots practiced maneuvers in simulators. Everyone knew the stakes. This wasn't just another mission. It was humanity's response to an unforgivable act of aggression. Laura Hayes stood on the observation deck, watching as ships were loaded with supplies and ammunition. She felt a mix of awe and anxiety. The vessels gleamed under the artificial lights, their sleek designs bristling with firepower. These were Earth's best, built to withstand even the harshest battles. But no amount of preparation could erase the fear gnawing at her stomach. She had seen what the Syndicate was capable of, and she knew this fight wouldn't be easy. Nearby, Mark Dawson sat cross-legged on the floor, tinkering with a small handheld device. He glanced up at Laura and grinned. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," he said, his tone light despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm fine," Laura replied, though her voice betrayed her nerves. "Just thinking." Mark stood and walked over to her. "Thinking too much can drive you crazy. Trust me, I've been there. Focus on what you can control, your training, your team. Everything else will fall into place." Laura nodded, grateful for his attempt to lift her spirits. Mark had a way of making things seem simpler, even when they weren't. His confidence was contagious, and she found herself feeling a little calmer. Sarah Bennett joined them a few moments later. As the team's medic, she carried the weight of knowing her job might involve patching up friends, or worse, watching them die. Despite this, she always seemed steady, her presence reassuring. "Ready for the big show?" she asked, leaning against the railing. "As ready as I'll ever be," Laura said with a weak smile. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've got each other's backs. No matter what happens, we stick together. That's how we'll get through this." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. They trained relentlessly, running simulations that mimicked the conditions they would face during the mission. In one exercise, Laura led her team through a mock infiltration of an enemy base. Smoke machines filled the room with haze, while strobe lights simulated explosions. The goal was to reach a central computer terminal and extract data, all while avoiding enemy fire from automated turrets. It was chaotic, but Laura managed to keep her cool, directing her teammates with clear instructions. When the drill ended, Major Ethan Cole approached her. "You're improving," he said, his expression serious but approving. "Your instincts are good, and your leadership is solid. Keep it up." "Thanks," Laura replied, though she still doubted herself. She wondered if she was truly ready to lead others into such a dangerous situation. But she pushed those thoughts aside. There was no time for second-guessing now. Admiral Robert Ellis addressed the entire crew the night before departure. Standing on a raised platform, he looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Tomorrow, we take the fight to the Syndicate," he began, his voice echoing through the hangar. "They think they can strike at us and walk away unscathed. They think we're weak. They're wrong." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Each of you has trained hard for this moment. You've sacrificed time with your families, endured long hours, and pushed yourselves to your limits. Now it's time to prove them wrong. Together, we will dismantle the Syndicate and bring justice to those who attacked our convoy. We fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone back home who depends on us." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the vast space. For the first time in days, Laura felt a spark of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but they weren't alone. They had each other, and they had a purpose. As she looked around at her teammates, she realized something important. Fear was natural, but courage came from standing together, even in the face of overwhelming odds. That night, Laura lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed Admiral Ellis's speech, the sound of his voice still ringing in her ears. Slowly, she drifted off to sleep, dreaming of stars and the battles yet to come. The fleet moved silently through the dense nebula, its ships cloaked in shadow. The swirling clouds of gas and dust made navigation difficult, but they also provided cover from enemy sensors. Admiral Ellis had chosen this approach carefully. Stealth was their greatest advantage. If the Syndicate detected them too soon, the mission would fail before it even began. Laura Hayes sat tense in her seat aboard the dropship, her fingers gripping the edge of her harness. Around her, the rest of the team prepared for what lay ahead. Mark Dawson double-checked his gear, ensuring every tool he might need was within reach. Sarah Bennett reviewed medical supplies, her movements quick but precise. The hum of the ship's engines filled the cabin, a constant reminder of the danger waiting for them. As they neared the asteroid base, the first phase of the operation kicked into action. Stealth fighters darted ahead, their sleek forms nearly invisible against the backdrop of the nebula. Their mission was simple: disable the base's defense systems. Without those shields, the larger fleet could move in and provide support. Laura watched the monitors as the fighters approached their target. Explosions lit up the darkness as missiles struck key points on the asteroid's surface. Alarms blared inside the base, but it was too late. The defenses were down. "Go, go, go," Major Ethan Cole shouted over the comms, signaling the ground teams to advance. The dropships descended rapidly, shaking violently as they broke through the thin atmosphere surrounding the asteroid. Laura clenched her teeth, bracing herself for impact. When the ship touched down, the ramp lowered with a hiss, revealing a desolate landscape littered with jagged rocks and metal structures. The air was thick with dust, and the faint glow of artificial lights illuminated the entrance to the base. "Stay sharp," Ethan ordered as the team disembarked. "We don't know what's waiting for us." They moved quickly, sticking close to the shadows as they approached the main facility. The entrance was guarded by 2 Syndicate soldiers, their weapons trained outward. Laura signaled to Mark, who pulled out a small device and aimed it at the guards. A soft beep sounded, and the soldiers' suits sparked, rendering them unconscious. The team slipped past unnoticed, stepping into the dimly lit corridors beyond. Inside, the base was a maze of narrow hallways and locked doors. Laura led the way, relying on a map displayed on her wrist console. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of their mission pressing down on her. They passed rooms filled with strange equipment. Some looked like weapons, others like scientific instruments. In one chamber, they found something that made Laura's blood run cold: cages. Inside were colonists, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. They had been prisoners of the Syndicate, used for experiments or worse. "We'll come back for them," Ethan whispered when he saw the look on Laura's face. "Our priority is finding Kane." Mark hacked into the central computer system, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his handheld device. "Got it," he said after a moment. "Downloading everything now. This should give us intel on the Syndicate's entire operation." But their victory was short-lived. Alarms began to wail, echoing through the corridors. Red lights flashed overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "They know we're here," Sarah said, gripping her rifle tightly. Footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Reinforcements were coming. Laura glanced at Ethan, who nodded firmly. "Time to move," he said. "Double time." They sprinted down the hallway, dodging blasts from enemy weapons as Syndicate troops closed in. Laura's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't let fear take over. Not now. As they rounded a corner, Victor Kane appeared unexpectedly, flanked by armed guards. His cold eyes locked onto Laura, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing but insects trying to crawl out of the dirt." Laura stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Maybe we're insects, but we bite." Kane laughed, raising his weapon. The standoff lasted only seconds before gunfire erupted, forcing the team to retreat. They fought their way back to the extraction point, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Sarah stayed behind briefly to cover their escape, taking a hit to protect Laura. Her sacrifice bought them enough time to reach the dropship. As they lifted off, Laura looked back at the asteroid base, her mind racing. They had succeeded in gathering the data, but the cost had been high. And somewhere in the distance, Kane's laughter still echoed in her ears. The dropship shuddered as it climbed higher, leaving the asteroid base behind. Laura sat near the rear, her hands trembling as she stared at the floor. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, anger, and grief all tangled together. Sarah's sacrifice weighed heavily on her. The medic had been brave, shielding Laura from enemy fire so the team could escape. It was a debt Laura knew she could never repay. Mark Dawson sat across from her, his face pale but focused. He held the data drive tightly in one hand, the small device containing vital information about the syndicate's operations. "We got what we came for," he said quietly, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Laura nodded, but the victory felt hollow. Too many lives had been lost. On the convoy, during the mission, and even among the colonists they had seen imprisoned on the base. She glanced at Ethan Cole, who stood near the cockpit, his expression grim. He caught her eye and gave a slight nod, as if to say, "We did what we had to do." Outside, the battle raged on. Earth's fleet engaged the Syndicate forces, their ships exchanging fire in a dazzling display of light and destruction. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, sending shockwaves through the void. Admiral Ellis coordinated the assault from his flagship, his voice calm but firm over the comms. "Hold the line," he ordered. "We're finishing this." Victor Kane's prototype fighter darted through the chaos, its advanced engines making it nearly impossible to track. Kane himself piloted the craft, his skills unmatched. He fired volley after volley, targeting Earth's ships with precision. His cold laughter crackled over open channels, taunting the fleet. "You think you can win?" he sneered. "This is just the beginning." Despite his arrogance, the tide began to turn. Earth's pilots worked together, using teamwork and strategy to outmaneuver Kane's forces. One by one, Syndicate ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. The asteroid base itself took heavy damage, its defenses crumbling under relentless bombardment. Flames erupted from its surface as explosions tore through its core. Back aboard the dropship, Laura watched the battle unfold on a monitor. Her heart sank when she saw Kane's fighter break free from the fray. "He's escaping," she whispered, her voice tight with frustration. Ethan stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "We'll get him another time. For now, we've done enough." The dropship docked with the main fleet moments later. As Laura and her team disembarked, they were met by Admiral Ellis, who looked both relieved and weary. "Good work," he said, his voice steady. "The data you retrieved will help us dismantle the Syndicate's network. But there's still much to do." Laura didn't respond. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on Sarah, on the colonists left behind, on Kane's smug grin as he slipped away. She wanted to feel proud of their success, but all she could think about was the cost. How many more would die before this war ended? Later, in the quiet solitude of her quarters, Laura replayed the events in her mind. She pulled out a small photo she kept tucked in her uniform, a picture of her family back home. They were smiling, unaware of the horror she had faced. She traced their faces with her finger, wishing she could tell them everything was okay. But it wasn't. Not yet. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Ethan. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Laura shrugged. "I don't know. I keep thinking about Sarah, about everyone we lost." Ethan nodded. "It's hard. You want to save everyone, but sometimes you can't. What matters is that we're still standing. We're still fighting." His words offered little comfort, but they reminded her why she had joined the mission in the first place: to protect others, to make sure sacrifices like Sarah's weren't in vain. She took a deep breath and stood, determination slowly replacing despair. "What happens next?" she asked. "We analyze the data," Ethan replied. "Find weaknesses in the Syndicate's operations, hit them where it hurts, and when the time comes, we go after Kane again. This isn't over." Laura nodded, feeling a flicker of resolve reignite within her. Kane might have escaped, but he couldn't run forever. Somewhere out there, he was planning his next move. And when he made it, Earth would be ready. For now, though, the survivors regrouped, tending to their wounds and mourning their losses. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from finished. In the vast expanse of space, shadows still loomed, waiting for their chance to strike. And Laura knew she wouldn't rest until those shadows were gone for good. Weeks passed after the mission to the asteroid base. The fleet returned to Earth, carrying both triumph and sorrow. The data retrieved from the syndicate's systems proved invaluable. Intelligence teams worked tirelessly, sifting through files and decrypting codes. They uncovered a network of secret bases, illegal weapon caches, and plans for future attacks. It was clear that the Orion Syndicate had been planning something big, and Earth's strike had disrupted their operations significantly. President William Hart addressed the world once again, this time with a tone of cautious optimism. "We have dealt a severe blow to the Syndicate," he announced during a televised speech. "Their leadership is fractured, their resources depleted. But we must remain vigilant. This victory is only the beginning." The public reaction was mixed. Some celebrated the success, waving flags and cheering in the streets. Others mourned the lives lost during the battle, questioning whether the cost had been too high. Laura Hayes watched the news from her apartment, feeling disconnected from both sides. She understood the need for celebration, but the faces of her fallen comrades haunted her dreams. She couldn't shake the image of Sarah Bennett lying motionless on the asteroid base, shielding her with her own body. Despite the emotional toll, Laura threw herself into training. She spent hours in simulation rooms, honing her skills and preparing for whatever came next. Major Ethan Cole noticed her dedication and often joined her, offering guidance and encouragement. "You're getting better every day," he told her one evening after a particularly grueling session. "But don't forget to take care of yourself. You can't fight if you burn out." Laura nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. Sleep eluded her most nights, and when it did come, it brought nightmares of fire and screams. Still, she pushed forward, driven by a sense of duty. She owed it to Sarah, to Daniel Carter, and to everyone else who hadn't made it back. Meanwhile, Admiral Robert Ellis coordinated efforts to dismantle the Syndicate's remaining strongholds. Using the intelligence gathered during the mission, Earth's forces launched targeted strikes across the galaxy. One by one, Syndicate bases fell, their leaders captured or killed. The operation was swift and efficient, leaving the organization in disarray. Yet whispers of Victor Kane's survival lingered like a shadow over the victories. No one had seen him since he escaped in his prototype fighter, and his absence gnawed at Laura. One afternoon, Laura received an unexpected visit from Mark Dawson. He carried a small box under his arm, his expression unusually serious. "I thought you should see this," he said, placing the box on her table and opening it. Inside was a collection of personal belongings recovered from the asteroid base, rings, letters, and trinkets taken from imprisoned colonists. Among them was a bracelet engraved with the name Sarah *. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she picked it up. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "In one of the storage rooms," Mark replied softly. "It looks like they were keeping mementos, souvenirs. I thought you'd want it." Laura clutched the bracelet tightly, feeling a surge of anger and sadness. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you, Mark." As the days turned into weeks, life began to settle into a fragile routine. The scars of the battle remained, but people found ways to move forward. Laura visited Sarah's family, delivering the bracelet along with stories of her bravery. She struggled to find the right words, but the gratitude in their eyes gave her some measure of peace. Yet, even as Earth rebuilt and strengthened its defenses, the threat of the Syndicate loomed. Victor Kane was still out there, plotting his revenge. Laura knew the war wasn't truly over, not while he lived. She trained harder, studied longer, and prepared for the day when she would face him again. Until then, she focused on protecting those who depended on her. In the quiet moments, Laura gazed at the stars, wondering where Kane might be hiding. Somewhere in the vastness of space, he waited, biding his time. And so did she. When the moment came, she vowed to be ready. Months passed, and Earth began to heal from the scars of the battle. The streets that had once been filled with fear were now alive with hope. People returned to their daily lives, rebuilding what had been broken. The images of burning ships and lost lives still lingered in the minds of many, but they served as reminders of resilience rather than despair. Humanity had faced a great challenge and emerged stronger. Laura Hayes stood on a hill overlooking the city, her arms crossed against the cool evening breeze. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude for the peace that had returned, but also a deep awareness that it was fragile. Somewhere out there, Victor Kane was still alive, plotting his next move. Laura knew the fight wasn't over, not completely. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of calm. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. She turned to see Ethan Cole approaching, his hands in his pockets. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, nodding toward the empty space beside her. "Not at all," Laura replied, stepping aside to make room. They stood in silence for a while, watching the horizon shift colors. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You've come a long way since the convoy," he said, his tone gentle. "You've grown stronger, more confident. I'm proud of you." Laura smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without the team. Without people like Sarah. And you." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We all carry pieces of those we've lost. It's how we honor them." The words resonated with Laura. She thought about Sarah, about Daniel Carter, and all the others who had given their lives. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. Thanks to their bravery, Earth had struck back against the Syndicate, dismantling much of its power. The galaxy felt safer, though shadows still lingered. In the weeks that followed, Laura decided to stay in active service. The idea of returning to a normal life seemed impossible after everything she had seen. Instead, she chose to train new recruits, passing on the lessons she had learned. Her classes were tough, but fair, and her students respected her deeply. She taught them not just how to fight, but how to think, how to work together, and how to endure. One day, during a training exercise, a young recruit approached her. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Laura paused, considering the question. "All the time," she admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you find a way to keep going, even when it's hard." The recruit nodded, seeming to understand. Laura watched him walk away, feeling a sense of pride. These young men and women were the future, the ones who would protect Earth when she was gone. It gave her hope. As the months turned into years, whispers of Victor Kane grew quieter. Some believed he had fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, too afraid to face Earth's forces again. Others thought he might be dead, his empire crumbling without him to lead it. But Laura knew better than to assume anything. She stayed ready, training and preparing for the day he might resurface. That day never came during her lifetime. Instead, Earth flourished, expanding its reach and forging alliances with other civilizations. The scars of the past became stories told to remind future generations of the cost of freedom. Laura grew older, her hair streaked with gray, but her resolve remained unchanged. She retired eventually, settling into a quiet life surrounded by friends and memories. On clear nights, she would sit outside, gazing at the stars. She thought about the battles fought, the lives lost, and the friendships forged. She thought about Sarah, whose bracelet she still wore on her wrist, and she thought about Victor Kane, wherever he might be. Though the war had ended, Laura knew the universe was vast and unpredictable. There would always be challenges, always be threats, but humanity had proven itself capable of facing them head-on. Together, they had survived. And so, under the endless expanse of stars, Laura found peace. The road ahead would always hold uncertainty, but for now, the galaxy was safe. That was enough.